I'm kidding.
It is my privilege this morning to introduce you to Pastor Laurence Burns. He's a native South African, so you're going to enjoy his accent this morning. He's a graduate of Weimar and the Theological Seminary at Andrews University. He pastored in Sacramento, California, and then here at Andrews University as associate pastor of PMC and a chaplain at Andrews University. He is a loving husband and father, but he comes to us today to kick off our series on faith and relationships. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be exploring faith and relationships, and he comes to us as an expert on this issue of trust. And he's had such an experience working as the director for training at AFM, Adventist Frontier Missions, of helping people understand the foundation of trust in a relationship and how trust is integral. And I think by the time you leave today, you will have an effect on your relationships, your future careers with your bosses, your family members, and yes, even your romantic relationships as we explore trust. So please welcome with me Pastor Laurence Burns.
Thank you. Good morning to you. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to make a confession, and that is that I've probably got way too much information that I'm going to try and share with you, and I'm going to try and compensate by talking fast. So forgive me if I kind of break the sound barrier and you kind of hear, that's a problem I do have. But this is a topic that I'm really passionate about because, as you introduced it, it's in the context of healthy relationships. And so I want to introduce my family to you just because we're talking about healthy relationships and talking about trust in that context. So I'm going to put a couple of slides up on the board. This is one of my favorite pictures in the lower left. Every night after we'd had worship, I'd take my kids on an elephant ride to brush their teeth. And man, if you go to the next slide, my kids are growing up, got married out in California. It's my wife and my kids out in Turkey. And then one more, just to introduce the family to you. This is and the dog is our timekeeper in the house, on the clock with her need to go to the bathroom. My wife and I there in the Philippines. And if we look like we're tired, I'm kind of like, I put my face only halfway because I'm looking like this. I work for Adventist Frontier Missions. If you want to go to the next slide. And our mission is to plant Seventh-day Adventist church planting movements amongst unreached people groups. And here's the thing that I've learned and why trust is so important, why healthy relationships are so important. If we can actually go and share the gospel around the world, we need to have a foundation of healthy relationships. And the question of how do you build healthy relationships? One of the biggest challenges to actually sending and supporting missionaries, surprisingly enough, is that missionaries have a hard time getting along with other missionaries. And how do we prepare that? How do we get around that challenge? Okay, so I'm going to share with you kind of a hypothesis that I have for my life and for my ministry, and I think this will kind of set the direction and tone for what we're going to talk about here. So if we can put that up here on the screen. Salvation looks like relational healing. Now what that means to me is that if you're going to actually catch salvation happening, if you're going to look around you and see that God is working, God is doing something, it's going to look like relational healing. That means that I can't claim to be a Christian, a Christ follower, and not have my relationships around me improving. Because when God is present, that's what happens. Salvation looks like relational healing. Okay, the next premise is that community reveals relational brokenness. Now, here's my context. I came from a reasonably dysfunctional family, and because of that, I was terrified of relationships. As a matter of fact, in college and in high school, if anybody showed interest in me, I'd be like, wow, that's great, and then, pew, I run like the Dickens because I was terrified of relationships. Okay, and the realization that I had, it's like, man, I've got to get this right. So I was reading books and I was studying everything. I got so good at knowing all the things about how to do relationships well that I was giving, when I was a youth pastor, I was giving premarital counseling, I was giving postmarital counseling, and I wasn't even married yet. People were like, he's good. That's really phenomenal, man. He's got all this stuff down. So I'm like, yeah, I'm good. My relationships are really good. And then here's what happened. I got married and something, it's like, wow, this is hard. It's much harder to read books and teach other people to do it than to actually live it. Why? Because here's the fact. And that is that when we live together in community, it actually reveals our relational brokenness. Salvation looks like relational healing. Living in community of necessity reveals our relational brokenness, okay? Now, the next premise is this, and that is that relational brokenness provides us an opportunity for us to experience salvation. Now, you've got to think of that in the context of being a part of a Christian community because it's significant. Here's the thing. We come to a Christian school. We go to Bible class to learn about Bible facts. But I want to tell you something. Those facts mean nothing unless they translate into how we live together. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because what distinguishes us as a Christian community is not the facts that we have, but the lives that we live. And salvation, my friends, looks like what? Like relational healing. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the greatest opportunity for you to practice your Christianity is with the people around you. But here's the bad news. The people around you are messed up. So de facto, it's hard work to do healthy relationships. Okay, the final point, the final premise there, one more, and that is that the way we live together is the gospel we preach. Now, this is something that's really deeply meaningful to me because we send missionaries and their job is to preach the gospel. And if they're not getting along with each other, they're actually denying the gospel they intend to preach. Because I don't care what we say in chapel, what we say in church, I don't care what they say in Bible class, I don't care what the literature says, I don't care what it says on Andrews University website. When people come to Andrews University, they're going to feel what the gospel is here. And if it's the gospel, if it really is good news, people are going to be like, this is good news. But if it's bad news, people are going to talk about bad news. I don't care what the literature says. Do you follow me? So the way we live together is our gospel, and that's why we need salvation. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. I'm a big picture person. I like to see things from the big picture. I had a movie that I was going to show you, but I'll summarize it. There's this little girl whose dad is an astronaut. You've probably seen it's a Hyundai ad. And the Hyundai people all come together and they help her write this little note, and her dad gets this picture the size of, a huge city, and it says, "I love you, Dad." Okay, I want to think about trust and healthy relationships and what it takes to build healthy relationships in the context of us sending a love letter to God, showing what God can actually do in people's lives. Imagine everyone working together, a whole campus, having such profound gospel that we're actually expressing faithfully to each other and to the world the love of God. That's the big picture that I'd like to send to you today as we think about what we're going to talk about today. Good. Now, I want to talk to you, the theme for the message today is a powerful trust. A powerful trust. We're going to talk about trust in the context of relationships. I think next time you're talking about boundaries and they're talking about honesty. So we're looking at this trilogy on healthy relationships. Trust is the foundation. So next, what are we going to be looking at? Three prepositions or propositions I would like to make you. First of all, trust is the currency of community in the context of salvation. Looks like relational healing. We're going to unpack this a little bit. Everyone has trust issues. I want to unpack that just a little, and then Christian community, a powerful trust. We'll end with that and see where we can land with that. Okay, so trust is the currency of community. If you don't believe me, here's what you just watch the stock market. You get some president that sneezes, and the stock market goes down. Have you guys been following like the VW little thing that's been going on? Okay, so we're talking about trust there, right? Like they have betrayed trust. Now, what's the result? The stock market's just going through the floor. So the stock market and our physical currency is actually built on the foundation of trust. That reflects a social reality. How much money, when I give you this piece of paper, we understand inherently, if I give you something with $100 on it, $100 bill, you understand inherently that we have trust. There's a certain trust that's assumed within that relationship, okay? So trust is the foundation. Now, there's a fellow that I was introduced to several years ago. His name is Patrick Lencioni. Great guy. If you want to have some entertainment, go look up his stuff. He's brilliant a consultant. As a matter of fact, I was really interested in having him come to AFM and talk about trust to us several years ago. And one of our board members told me, way out of your market. This guy charges like $35,000 a day to do consulting for Fortune 500 companies. And his stuff is just really simple. He's got a book called The Advantage that he wrote. And so if we can put that up on the screen, Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage. Here's his simple premise. Very simple premise. organizations that are healthy beat organizations that are smart. So let's go to the next slide and just see what he means by that. Smart organizations focus on strategy, finance, marketing, technology. They've got clever people. They've got their systems down. Their website looks great, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? These are healthy, have these characteristics. They have minimal politics. Now, politics, by the way, is when you tell people what you feel you need to tell them in order to get what you think you want. Not what you believe, but that's what being political is, okay? So healthy organizations have minimal politics. That means they tell the truth to each other. People speak the truth. Next, minimal confusion, high morale, high productivity, low turnover. People love to go to work at a healthy organization. And his premise is, if you want to have an advantage, then work on being healthy, because healthy organizations get smarter. Smart organizations that are not healthy make stupid decisions. Because relationships and the quality of those relationships actually are the sum of those relationships actually produce the health at an organizational level. So he's got basically, let's go to the next slide. He's got basically 4 disciplines that are critical. Build cohesive teams, create clarity, over-communicate clarity, and reinforce clarity through human systems. We're going to focus on the first one because that's the foundation, building healthy team. And so the question is, how do you do that? He has another book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And the basic premise of this book, if we can go to the next slide, the basic premise is that because human beings are imperfect, when you put them together in a group, teams are inherently dysfunctional because people are imperfect. That means that if I'm part of your team, I'm going to bring dysfunction to the team. Why? Because I come to your team imperfect. Okay? So here's his premise. Because we're dysfunctional, we actually create dysfunctions within the team, and in order for teams to be healthy or high functioning, there's hard work that has to be done to overcome those dysfunctions. That's his premise. So let's look at the 5 dysfunctions very quickly, and we could do a whole half an hour on this. I'm going to try and fly through this. The first dysfunction is what? The absence of trust. Okay, so here's the thing. This is foundational. Trust is foundational, and there's 2 kinds of trust. There's predictive trust. That means if I'm asked to be here at 5 after, I do my very best to be here at 5 after. And if I do that enough times, if I meet my appointments and meet my deadlines and I follow through with my obligations, you're going to say, yes, we can probably predict that if we ask him to do something, he's going to be there. Lencioni says, I'm not talking about that. He says, I'm talking about something called vulnerability-based trust. This is different from predictive trust. What is vulnerability-based trust? Vulnerability-based trust is when you're on a team and something goes wrong, somebody does something wrong, you're the leader of the team, and this is especially important for the leaders to do, to demonstrate this. You're on a team, and something goes wrong, and the team leader says, I take responsibility for that, I'm sorry. Somebody loses their temper, and they come back and they say, I just want to let you know, I was out of line the other day, please will you forgive me? That's vulnerability. You see, vulnerability assumes that you could get hurt. And when you have vulnerability-based trust, that means that you can be who you are with all of your assets and all of your liabilities, and you can be loved anyway. You can be valued anyway on that team. Now, here's the reason why that's absolutely foundational to teams, and that is that if you're going to build a team, the assumption of team is that you've got a task that's bigger than any one person. That you need a group of people with their strengths and weaknesses to work together. And here's the thing, a team can only work together well if we're aware of our strengths and our weaknesses, and we're willing to give our best from our strengths and cover for each other in our areas of weakness. And when you have invulnerability, you can't do that. So do you understand why trust is the foundation? Now, I've got to tell you, I've been teaching this for years, trying to build healthy teams, and it's hard. There's people like, oh, yeah, that's right. I do consulting. And if you can just put that back up again, here's how they show up. Absence of trust, then if there's no trust, people are afraid to have conflict. That means that, and we're not talking about interpersonal conflict here, we're talking about ideological conflict. This is where we fight over ideas. So people are afraid to fight over ideas, and then if I haven't been able to weigh in, I don't buy in. That means if I haven't been able to say, look, I'm concerned about this, I don't believe in that, and we've had debate about issues, I'm not willing to commit to it. I just make a contribution. I give the minimal that I can give so that I don't get fired. And if I haven't committed to something, I'm not going to be willing to be held accountable for that. Somebody says to me, well, we all agreed to this. No, I didn't agree to that because I still had issues with that. And what happens in an organization where there's low trust is you have meetings and everyone says yes, and then we go to the water cooler and we say, did you agree with what that guy said? Like, he's a total idiot, don't you think? Okay, in high-functioning teams, you're sitting around the table and you say, I don't think we could do that. As a matter of fact, if you did that, I would think you were a total idiot. Okay? It's a different environment. It's an environment of transparency and trust at the interpersonal level. Okay? And then the next dysfunction builds on that, and that is avoidance of accountability, which ultimately results in inattention to results. So teams that have trust issues don't get anything done. And I've had companies call me in and say, we're really having trouble getting stuff done. We've got silos going on all around. And I'm like, sounds like you guys have got trust issues in your organization. They go, how did you know? It was Lencioni. Simple model. Now, here's the thing. That's simple, but tremendously difficult to actually implement. How do you actually overcome this? It becomes a lot more complicated. Let's look at the next slide. I was listening to or watching a TED Talk, and there was this lady by the name of, because here's the second point, everyone has trust issues, okay? Everyone has trust issues, and I want to see if I got, okay, so yeah, we all come from backgrounds. First of all, so where do our trust issues come from? So let's go back. Where do our trust issues come from? There's several places that we develop trust issues. Number one is wherever people have failed us. We actually develop memories of relationships. Like, man, if you get into this kind of situation, that's toast, okay? So for instance, in my family, we had a fair amount of dysfunction. And so in interpersonal relationships, there's certain dimensions of relationships where I'm like a teenage kid with pimples. Like, I don't know how to deal with it. I just feel really awkward in those kinds of situations. Why? Because when you've had a bad experience, that actually sets you up to recognize other threats around you, okay? We all come from places where there's conflict. There's this kid, I think, I want to make sure I keep on track here. Yeah. There's this kid in the Bible, Genesis chapter 37. He comes from this really crazy dysfunctional family. I mean, his dad's name means deceiver, right? His dad's name means deceiver. He's got two brothers that massacred a whole city. He's got another brother that slept with one of his father's wives. I mean, it's just, think about growing up in a family like that. Dysfunctional. And then this guy's got issues. He's really got issues. He's like got this colored, multicolored coat, and his brothers are against him, and his father sends him out to go and check out how his brothers are doing. When he gets there, his brothers rip off the coat and throw him in a cistern. So that's that picture if they put it up on there. Okay, think about the kind of trust that you would have. Think about the kind of issues that you would have if you had a background like that. Now, my point is, every one of us has a bit of that going on. There's two kinds of people in this room when it comes to trust. On the one hand, we've got people who feel like, I am a worm. Okay, oh man, are people going to accept me? And then you've got other people who walk in like Joseph, and it's like, I am God's gift to mankind. Both of those represent trust issues. Okay, either I am better than you or I am worse than you, depending on our background. Now, here's the thing why that's important, okay? You have a teacher that gives you a bad grade. Depending on what your background was, you're gonna have a whole lot of different reasons why. Well, if you think you're a worm, you're going to be like, oh, I'm so stupid. Like, I could never do anything right. I'm sure that's the grade I deserve. If you come from another background, you might say, my teacher's racist. Like, it's got to be, oh, my teacher's definitely racist. Or you got to see, my teacher is simply deluded. He just doesn't know how much of a bright student I am. I mean, my whole life has just told me that. Okay, so depending on your background, it's actually going to affect how you relate to conflict in the present. Okay, so think about this. Here's Joseph. He's going on his way down to Egypt. Okay, dysfunctional background. And I just think about, here's this picture of a camel going through the desert. And once you have, that experience, anytime Joseph sees a camel, I got 3 pictures, just go through them. He must have this must have reminded him of his brothers. Like, he must have just been like angry, or, like, oh man, those people. But what happens to Joseph? I'm going to leave him in Egypt here for a little bit. So with that premise, I would like to suggest that there's 3, we talk about IQ, like how smart people are, like, wow, this person's really smart. And then the next one, if you can put those up on the screen. Okay, so you got IQ, intelligent quotient, you've got your EQ, which is how emotionally intelligent you are. I want to suggest that we should have something called TQ. Because what I've realized is that everyone comes into a relationship with different levels of trust. Okay, you've got someone that's very high levels of trust. What do we call them when they come to college? Gullible. They've come from an environment where people have only told them the truth all the time, like you just believe everything. Why? Because that's the world they come from. They come to college and it's like, oh, here's someone we can take advantage of. We're going to have fun with this person. Okay, the TQ is actually really high for that person. Okay, then on the other hand, you've got people who've got zero trust, like, I don't trust anybody unless they earn the trust, and then I'm going to question. Okay, that really complicates having healthy relationships. What happens if you have a high TQ with a low TQ dating? Massive problems, massive issues. Okay, so let's go on. It gets even worse than this. This is where this lady comes in. So her name is Pamela Myers, and she studies lying. And this just actually blew me out of the water. You watch the TED Talk if you're interested. I just want to warn you, she doesn't come from a Judeo-Christian worldview, but what she says is just really disturbing. Okay, I was doing some research on kind of other places that are studying about lying. Let's put the next slide up here. So here's some things from a book. 1 in 4 Americans believe that it's okay to lie to an insurer. 1/3 of all resumes contain false information. 1/3 of all resumes contain false information. 1 in 5 employees say that he is aware of fraud in his workplace. More than 3/4 of lies go undetected. Deception costs $994 billion. Another researcher said this: if you've talked to somebody for 10 minutes a day, it's possible that you've been lied to up to 60 times. Now, what these guys are measuring is all kinds of lies. They say that men and women, put the next slide up, men and women tend to lie for different reasons. Men tend to lie to make themselves look better than they really are. And women tend to lie to protect others. I thought that was really insightful. But here's some ideas about lying. Someone comes out of the dormitory, they spend hours preparing themselves, and they say, how do I look? And what do you say? You don't tell them what you think, right? You don't say, you look fat, right? You're going to say something that's socially acceptable, even if it's different from what you're thinking. Because we've been taught it's better to lie than to tell the truth in social situations. And one of Pamela's points is that this kind of thing, this white lies, actually is more pervasive than we actually think. You know, as I've started thinking about this in the context of trust and building trust, what if you knew, kind of at a gut level, that people were just lying to you all around, all the time? I mean, I'd have trust issues, wouldn't you? Like implicitly, does he really think that I'm pretty today? Or is he just telling me that because he wants something? Right? Like when your boyfriend's texting somebody and you're like, who's that you're texting? He's like, nobody, nothing. You understand what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying? You go to your teacher and your teacher says to you, I've got a little question, I've got a little concern about this particular aspect of your academic. Well, and you're going to make up something to actually either make yourself, you understand what I'm saying? This stuff is pervasive, and we live defensively, afraid to be caught out. We're covering ourselves, we're protecting ourselves. And the thing is, you go to other countries where lying is the cultural norms of lying is different. We're like, those people are so dishonest. That you don't know how dishonest we look to each other if you were coming from the outside. Does that make sense? So this issue, everyone's got trust issues. Like, why are we lying to each other so much? Why are the sociologists telling us it's all about lie spotting? You can learn to look people, and they kind of have these little tweaks and jerks, and it leaks out, and you can catch them lying. Why is that? Here's the thing. The effect is that it results in us having lower and lower trust. That we go into community, we go into society self-defensively. But it gets even worse than that. I read another book called Leadership and Self-Deception. Now, it's one thing to deceive somebody else. Self-deception is even more insidious. So, here's what a liar is. I know what's true, and I know what's false. I'm going to convince you to believe that what is false is true. He, gotcha. That's lying. You know what self-deception is? I know what's true, I know what's false. I somehow lead myself to believe that what is false is true. You know what that's called? That's called a loss of integrity. When we deceive ourselves, it's a loss of integrity. Put the next slide up just for a moment. I love this picture. Okay, next one. You can read this book. I recommend it to you. This is a great illustration of self-deception, right? Guys have this ability to doesn't matter what you look like, you can find like there, we're gonna get them in the mirror, right? Show up. Now, here's the thing. This kind of thing happens most frequently in conflict. Self-deception. Here's what it looks like. When you're in conflict with somebody, you need them to look worse than they really are. You need them to look worse than you really do. And so you amp up their vices. You really man, you got to demonize them. And then you need yourself to look much better than you really are to yourself. Think about this. I'm thinking I've got a high school, my daughter's a junior at Andrews Academy. And when she enters Andrews Academy, I was like, man, the drama that happens, but at the relational level, oh man. So here's the thing. You got this girl that likes this guy, and there's this awkward dance, like, will he like me back? Yeah. She's talking to her friends. And it's different with guys and girls. I'm like, my son's in 8th grade, my daughter was like 7th grade. This drama starts picking up. I'm talking to my son, I was like, is there any drama? And he's like, I don't know. Do you like any guys and girls stuff going on? He's like, I have no clue. I don't know. My daughter's like totally into it. Okay, so here's the thing. There's this guy, and this girl, she really smitten. I mean, she's like talking to her friend. She's like engraved him on her, the bedpost. His name is there. She's thinking about him. She's journaling about this guy. Man, she's in love. The guy's clueless. Okay, he doesn't even know. And then one day he kind of gets a clue, and he's shows interest. And she's like, oh, I'm going to marry this guy. How many kids are we going to have? They start dreaming dreams, right? And then this kid who's 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, totally immature, no idea about, all he's interested in playing video games, right? So he's playing video games and he shows a little, it's oh, this is flattering. And then he's like, man, that's disgusting. I want to go back to my video games. And he breaks up with her. Oh, I want to tell you, talk about having a name like mud. Man, this girl, she's like a knife scratching out his name. And she's to friends, he would be the devil if he walked into the room, kill him, right? Why? Because you see, in self-deception, we actually need to amp up the vices of others and amp up our virtues so that we can do disgusting things to one another and justify it in our minds. Okay, talk about building trust when that stuff's going on. Disgusting. Okay, so here's the thing. It's easy to talk about trust in community, but you and I have no idea how committed we are to undermining it. How committed we are to protecting ourselves from each other because we are afraid. How committed we are to living our lives within our shell so that we don't get hurt. And here's what the gospel steps into this realm, okay? And salvation looks like relational healing. So the question is, what does it mean to be a Christian when it comes to trust and trust building? That's why our last point that I want to talk about is that to live in Christian community means that we understand and experience a powerful trust. The fact that God would know us for who we are and choose us, call us, want us, reflects a powerful trust that only God is capable of. A trust that says, if they'll give themselves to me, I can do something with this mess. Do you understand that the only hope that any individual has with living within this communal dysfunction from our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents, what's happened to us, and then what we do ourselves, all of this mess, the only way out of it is if there is a super trust that enters into our world and helps to redefine how we think and how we behave. Let me ask you a question. Where do we practice Christianity? What does it take to practice Christianity? Well, if we understand that the heart of Christianity is the declaration of something called the gospel. What is the gospel? The gospel is good news, my friends. When do you need good news? We need good news when there's horribly terrible bad news. Now, what that means is that when you encounter someone who's lying to you, someone who's totally self-deceived, you got two options. One is to say, man, that person is a freaking liar. I can't believe it. I'm going to have nothing to do with that person. That person's so self-deceived, so self-centered. Man, they would marry themselves if they could. Okay? That's one option. The other option is to come from this realm of super trust and to realize that when you encounter bad news, that's an opportunity for you to actually experience good news. As a matter of fact, every time you encounter dysfunction and trust in other relationships, the question is the faith and experience that I have with God, is He powerful enough to turn this thing around? Could I be an instrument that would actually bring trust where there's been distrust? Could I do the hard work of actually making myself vulnerable and actually moving from lying to truth-seeking? As a matter of fact, Pamela Meyer, she says something very interesting. She says, the goal of lie spotting is not to catch people in the act of lying. As a matter of fact, we want to move from lie spotting to truth-seeking. Here's the reason why. No one can lie to you unless you let them. So that means that when people lie to each other, they're actually doing it and they're complicit. They're doing it together. They're undermining trust together. Why? Because they're saying, this relationship is not worth being truthful about. How are you? I'm fine. One of the biggest lies we tell each other, right? Like I've started saying, people say, how are you? I'm saying, I'm hungry. And they're like, really? I'm not doing well. I'm really stressed. I've got a lot going on. Well, I'm actually telling the truth. That's not socially acceptable. That's not what's expected when you ask me how I'm doing. You actually expect me to lie. I'm fine. Okay, but that's not true. Truth seekers are people who want authentic relationships, who want healthy relationships. And I want, in my own life experience, the only way that we can truly have those kind of relationships is as if we experienced a powerful trust. Paul says it like this, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God to bring salvation. My friends, salvation looks like relational healing. Here's the thing, when you leave this building, you're going to encounter things that are going to challenge your trust. Is this safe? The word trust literally means a place of refuge. Literally means a place of refuge. I'm safe here. The question is not, are you going to find it out there, but are you going to be it in here? When people encounter you, are they going to find a place of refuge, or are they going to find a frightened soul trying to survive in a world of lying and deception and fear? What does it mean to be a Christian community? It means that Christ has taken hold of me. And that because of that, there's good news in the world. I want to end with this. For many years, I believed that if my wife would just change, our marriage would improve. Totally, I believe that. Like, there's dysfunctions that she has that are just, it's pretty bad. Like my wife, I could tell you about her dysfunction and her history, and I could tell you all about that. And boy, what kind of sorrow and hardship and heartache that has caused me. Many years I lived in that place. Here's something that I discovered, though, not too long ago. That when I truly allow this powerful trust, God's intention to choose and change me, and I become a truth seeker, and I really care about the pain behind the anger. I really care about the person behind the dysfunctional behavior. That's where relational healing begins. I become an instrument of healing rather than a perpetuator of brokenness. Because you see, hurting people hurt people. Hurting people hurt people. If you can see the hurt behind people's lies, you can see the fear behind their self-deception, you become a source of good news in the world. Now, I want to be honest with you. Embracing this journey and the transformation it demands in me has been the hardest thing I've ever done. It's challenged me in my core. I feel like a wimp sometimes. I got to go to God on my knees and say, God, please help me be a trust builder rather than a lie teller. But I want to tell you something else. I love my family, I love my kids, and I love my wife. Healthy relationships are within your reach if you will respond to the powerful trust that's reaching out to you. Thank you very much.